Hi, everybody. I'm Darlene Prides, and I'd like to welcome you to a new episode of Living Franciscan. This is really meant to be a series of very informal conversations with people who self-identify as following a Franciscan path of spirituality, but without being a vowed member of an order or even affiliated with the congregation. These are intended really just to be conversations to open up our shared awareness of what it means to be Franciscan in the 21st century. So today I'm really pleased to welcome Carie Moore. Welcome, Carie.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Why don't we just start off with, I'd like to learn more about you, how you discovered the Franciscan path.
Sure, yeah. I just a little bit of background around me. I am a mom of two little girls, and my husband and I met in college, and that is where we were both introduced to the Franciscan teaching and the Franciscan tradition. That was not something that had ever been on my radar prior. So I was introduced to it when I was about, I think, 19 years old was the first time. I went to college and majored in religion and philosophy. And growing up, I had always been raised in the Lutheran church. So I was very familiar with Protestant teachings and not very familiar with Catholic teachings. But my one of my professors, whose name was Dr. Tim Johnson, he, in some of his classes, introduced us to Franciscan theology, to Franciscan figures, Franciscan spirituality. And I was so immediately captivated by the teachings of St. Francis, by the stories that I heard, that and my husband and I the same as well. He grew up Baptist and he also was very unfamiliar with this. And we both were so immediately captivated by these teachings and by these figures that pretty much ever since then, it has never been a second thought in our mind that we identify as Franciscan and trying to, in the best way that we can, follow a Franciscan way of life.
Hmm. Well, so I'm just going to say I'd love to get your husband on this series for in the future.
Yes,
But it's so
definitely.
interesting that you have discovered the Franciscan path as a spiritual path, but through an academic context. You're like many of the other people that I've interviewed. How does that academic introduction translate to a personal application for you?
So that's a really good question. I felt like it was kind of because of the nature of, Franciscan theology and a lot of the things that are more academic and heady. Um, the root of those concepts translated very easily to me into my own personal life and spiritual life. For example, like, the very academic concept of Haseity or something by John Duns Scotus. That was something that I really was so intrigued by in an academic sense. And then in my personal life, it really changed my worldview and my understanding of how God doesn't create generally, but seeing the world as so specifically designed and intended, and understanding that even about myself and about my children, and that they're designed exactly how they were intended to be. And I feel like so many things in the Franciscan tradition kind of have both facets to them where they can be very academic, but also very grounded at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Your husband and I, in some ways, have a very similar background in that I was introduced to the Franciscan path also in college as a freshman, but it wasn't the theology that gripped me. It was the stories. And so, um, and in fact, I really didn't like some of the readings I had to read. I thought they were kind of sappy. I wasn't reading this as a freshman. Um, I'm curious to know what you teach your children about the Franciscan way and how you teach it.
So, a lot of, I feel like a lot of what I teach my children right now, because they're 4 and 6 years old, is very much teaching through um, example. So, in the sense of how we treat others, how we, treat the earth, how we take care of the earth, and things like that. I have several St. Francis books and that like children's books that I read to them. Um, that we really enjoy reading together because the story of Francis and Claire, I think, in a sense, is very accessible to kids because, in a way, I feel like there's a very childlike quality about St. Francis and in the way that, in the way he acted towards creation. And I find that my children, my Zach and I, my husband, have always joked that I think children are born just inherently Franciscan because they will see the caterpillar crossing the road and make sure it gets to safety, or they marvel at these elements in nature, or they do have a strong sense of justice and fairness, and seeing the things that sometimes adults do not see. And so I find that with my kids, it's very much like an ongoing conversation that deepens as they get older about um, our values that I believe are very deeply Franciscan, that sort of make their way into our everyday lives.
Yeah, I have so many questions here. First of all, when you look back on your own childhood, do you remember being very Franciscan as a child?
I do remember things about my childhood. I feel like as an adult we do start to forget things, and it's very much in the very little children, I feel like. And then it kind of, sometimes once you get out into the world and start getting older, it starts to sometimes, sort of get washed out of you. But especially when my kids were toddlers, um, I saw that, and so I don't have a whole lot of memory of those years in my life, but I do have memory of being a child and you know just n- being fascinated by the smaller things in nature that maybe we as adults tend to overlook sometimes.
Yeah, so that leads me to that next question that I had already about 5 minutes ago, and that is, how do you anticipate rearing your children as they get older so they don't forget? Or do you think that's just a natural part of maturation, and then as we get even older, we refind it? I mean, is that a necessary trajectory or what?
I don't think it has to be. I think that it definitely is the easy way for things to go. And I definitely don't have all the answers for how to, you know, make sure to raise children who maintain, these values and this idea about the world and about people. But I feel like for me, I see so much of that, like, kind of, I guess, Franciscan wisdom in them naturally, that I want to make sure that I don't, oh, that's foolish, like that's silly, we need to hurry up, we need to, that I'm not the one who's kind of washing it out of them, if that makes sense, and to recognize that wisdom in children sometimes that people don't see, and to try to nurture that as they get older. And like I said before, it's very much a conversation that I think deepens with time. So something that, you know, was very surface level of, what was talked about with my child when she was 2, maybe experienced more in action or in what she saw me do, or how I saw her interact with the world. Now we have deeper conversations now that she's 6, and that's going to look different when she's 16. So I think that it's not so much about the answers like me having the answers for how to do that, but both of us exploring, like me and my children exploring what it means to be Franciscan together as they get older, and also seeing how their unique perspectives and views, impact that as well.
Mm. I'd love it if we can make some of these statements that you're making a little bit more concrete. I know you're a philosopher.
Yeah.
And I'm a historian, and so I'm always looking for, concrete lived experience. So what are the Franciscan values that you've extracted from the tradition, whether it's from SCOTUS or the stories, the hagiography? What are the values that you see in the tradition that you live by?
I feel like a core value for me that is just, it's one that, is very central in our own family values, that I also feel like is very central within, at least my experience of the Franciscan tradition, is just recognizing the inherent dignity in every living thing and every living person. And that, that's obviously something that impacts so many aspects of our lives. How I handle parenting and with, my children, how we exist within our community, our how, politics, it impacts so many things. Um, Also, environmental care is a very core value for us, and one that I feel like was very much, whenever I started hearing the stories of St. Francis and, reading his Canticle of the Creatures and things like that, to actually truly see the value in the earth and why we should be compelled to do our part, however small, to care for it. Um, that's those are two very core Franciscan values for me that I try to carry within our family.
Yeah, can we dig a little deeper too into those? Especially, why don't we start off with the environmental care? Because last year, what we was a year dedicated to celebrating the anniversary of the Canticle of Creatures, and I did my own deep dive into it and really came out the other end experiencing the complexity of something so simple. Yeah, brother, sun, sister, moon, experience all of creation as a sibling. But I don't know about you, but I have a complex relationship with my siblings. It hasn't been, just a walk in the park all the time. And so what does it really take to cultivate a sibling relationship with all of creation?
Yeah. I feel like in my own family, it has been, at least for my children, this is one of those things that I found very natural, especially, introducing this with young children, is, just kind of taking it literally, I guess. We name all of our backyard trees. My kids love to name all of our trees. And my daughter, especially my oldest daughter, will sometimes go out and have conversations with the tree. She'll just go talk to them. If we're out at night, you can guarantee both of my girls will be like, "Hi, Sister Moon." Just very, I guess, just kind of literally at this point in the stage that I'm at um, with my kids. For me, of course, it's a much more complex thing as well, just trying to figure out how to exist in the world in a way that not just theoretically sees everything as brother and sister, but actually lives by that. I find that that's a very complex thing, and it can be very difficult to find the balance in how to actually do that. It's not always so simple, and you know, yeah, it's kind of an ongoing journey for me, I suppose. But I definitely recognize the complexity seeing the earth as a sibling relationship. I think for me, I see it. I don't know if you've ever read Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. Um, that to me, even though it was absolutely, there was nothing about the Franciscan tradition in it. So much of it felt very aligned with what I had learned within Franciscan spirituality about the earth not just being a commodity, but rather existing in a relationship with it. Whatever you visualize that relationship to be, that you're living in a reciprocal relationship with the earth. And, that can look different at certain times than others, but that we're not just taking from the earth, but we're also giving as well.
Mhm. Fighting back from going to one of my pet topics, but I don't want to go there. I know that you do a lot of work on gentle parenting. Does this stem out of your affinity to the Franciscan path? Both the practice of it, but also your writing around it.
Absolutely. Yes. I felt like when I became a parent, the a lot of the values that I had because of, what I had like I guess what I had learned to really value deeply through the Franciscan tradition and Franciscan teachings, it just kind of translated over to parenting. And especially in that case, the idea that every living being, no matter how small, um, has inherent dignity and value, and is deserving of respect. And I found when I became a mom, I like to read. If I'm approaching something that is something new for me, um, I'm going to probably try to find a book on that topic or that thing. And when I became a parent, of course, I considered, I was a Christian parent. And so I looked up Christian parenting books, and I was pretty appalled at how the vast majority of popular Christian parenting books do not actually respect the inherent dignity of children as human beings, but instead put parents in like a godlike status over their children. Um, and so in that case, I very much thought about St. Francis and how so many of the most important parts of his ministry were, not just in the sermons he preached, but in the fact that he sort of voluntarily um, gave up his power. He became voluntarily uh, vulnerable so that he could sit in solidarity with people on the margins, people who were suffering. And to me, that seemed like a much better model of leadership, even in the parenting realm, than a lot of these things I was seeing in these Christian parenting books.
Yeah, how would you fit Francis's own relationship with his parents into your understanding of gentle parenting and Franciscan parenting?
Yeah, so that's very interesting. And so obviously his relationship with his dad was definitely rocky. Um, but and I his mom, I believe, if I'm not incorrect, didn't she um nurse him back to health when he um came back from fighting? Uh, it's definitely an interesting dynamic to look at because I think that his dad wanted to, in a sense, have that power over him and also then pass that power on to him so that he could have that privilege. And Francis voluntarily gave it up. That's not a very good answer, I realize, but
No, no,
it's something worth it's something worth exploring more. I think that I need to explore that topic more, probably.
amazing. This is supposed to be, yeah, sorry about that. Um,
I
now
kind of lost my train of thought as I got through it, so I apologize about that.
let's just keep it going because I find his relationship with his parents a necessary element of his conversion process. I mean, he fought the expectations of his father. That's what comes through in the text, but I think those expectations were held, albeit perhaps with more compassion, by his mother. And so, one of my, don't mean to derail this conversation, but one of my favorite spiritual teachers, Yvonne Rand, talks about judgment as being the most common obstacle to presence. And I
Yeah.
think what you're getting at in terms of gentle parenting is being deeply present with your children to let them be who they are and express who they are, how they express it, and be with that. And that's not to say anything goes. Just to tell the listener here, Carie and I have talked about this a little bit,
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
but this challenging relationship that Francis had with his parents, I think, was part of the rub that he knew he had to change. And he was probably ripped open into that conversion from his experiences at war, but also dealing with the own expectations that he got from his parents that rested inside of him. He had to work out his own expectations of, who he should talk to. And all of a sudden he keeps getting, running into the lepers. And it goes against his expectations of proper comportment. Um, so I think there's a lot there for us to, talk about and write about. But the
Yes,
issue
definitely.
of expectations that parents have. Do you have
Um,
expectations for your children?
I think all parents have expectations. I think it's how we communicate our expectations to our children or whether we choose to communicate, being selective about
Mm.
what expectations we choose to communicate to them because children most of the time naturally want to please their parents. And I think sometimes, and especially again in a lot of the popular Christian parenting books, this idea you'll see is that parents have not only the power but the responsibility to mold their children into exactly what they want them to be. And I actually think that that very much takes away from the possibility of them being exactly who they're meant to be in the moment. But yeah, I'm very selective about communicating my expectations to my children. And I think that it's a privilege to get to see them instead to live up to their own expectations, within reason, of course. Sometimes, there's the expectation that just for general things, but but um, for who I expect them to be. I'm more excited about seeing who they become rather than shaping them into what I need them to be.
Yeah, and seeing your family as I do, sometimes through social media, but I've met them a couple of years ago. There is a sense of personal responsibility that the children have. And they know that they will be held accountable.
Mm-hmm.
But it's based on who they are rather than who you tell them to be. And at least that's what I've seen. So I want to explore this a little bit more because you talked about being selective in terms of expressing to your kids, your children, your expectations. And we are all selective in what we choose from this tradition or any tradition. So this is not a judgment about you, but the Franciscan tradition doesn't have a lot of examples of really healthy family life. What do you say about that?
Yes, so I have noticed, just looking at different stories of different Franciscan figures, and a lot of them have very dysfunctional family lives, to say the least. Um, and so, in a sense, I definitely think that we can learn from these stories while also building upon them. Maybe looking at what was going on in this time, but then also taking the values that we learn from these stories and translating them to a modern, you know, consideration of what what would Franciscan family life look like? Maybe not based on the model of past Franciscan family life, literally, but what might it look like if Franciscan values do shape what family life looks like? And I think that that's a really important thing to ask. And I also think that the Franciscan tradition can be a pretty significant voice in the conversation about what does modern Christian parenting look like and what does modern Christian family life look like.
Yeah, well, once again, I don't want to steer this conversation.
Oh, please, whatever you'd like to
Well,
say.
I would love for you to do some research on Italian parenting because
Okay.
Italians parent their children very differently than Americans do, and it's such a children-centered culture, a great joy everyone has around children,
Mhm.
and great respect and caring for all the children. So just as an anecdote, when I lived in Rome, if there was a mother and a child in a stroller, I would always stand next to them if I was trying to cross a busy street, because I knew
Oh.
once they went out into the street, the cars would stop. So get out, yeah, maybe hit or miss, I don't know.
Mhm.
Wow, so let's see, where are we? Feels like we've talked about a lot of ideas.
Yes,
And so I want to get back to the lived experience of being Franciscan. And just kind of curious, do you say I'm Franciscan? How do you use that term?
I do. I mean, I definitely call myself Franciscan, although I have never undergone any kind of official becoming Franciscan, officially recognized in any way. Um, yeah, I don't know. I guess I've just, like Zach and I have just considered ourselves to be Franciscan for so long that it just feels like part of part of who we are in a sense. Um, I tell, my extended family and friends I'm Franciscan, and it is a term I use, and yeah, it's something that I'm continually exploring, and it change what it means to me to be Franciscan is ever evolving as well. Um,
And that is very Franciscan.
yes, yes, yes,
Himself up to lifelong conversion. And I'm convinced he was experiencing conversion until his very last breath.
absolutely.
And as you know, that I've been doing some work on what is often called the fourth order. That is people like you and me who self-identify as Franciscan without being a vowed member. And I hope there can be a time when we don't have to backpedal and we can say, yes, I'm Franciscan, but not in any official way.
Right.
But not, yeah, because I think identity is important and being able to claim that without a caveat, um,
Absolutely.
to meet other people's expectations. So, yeah. Well, this is just such a fascinating conversation. I'm sure you probably have other topics that you want to talk about. Is there anything else that you'd like to bring up?
I don't know. I feel like we covered a lot. I mean, there's so much more that we could talk about with with all of these topics. I could talk for hours about Franciscan parenting and and things like that. But I feel like we covered a lot.
Okay, good. And I am serious about asking your husband to interview, and what would be really fun is to get the two of you on at the same time to talk about parenting. That would be fun too. So
I'd love that. Yeah, definitely.
I think I have his email somewhere, so I'll go send him an email right after we hang up.
Yes, yes.
One thing I just want to close with, and that is so often the academic study of a subject, people can assume that it's merely academic. We use that phrase, right? Merely academic. That it's theoretical and it's heady. But we share this in common, that we both got hooked into this tradition through the academic study. And it's true for so many people that God really does know how to hook us, right? For us, it has been through study, and then that opens up the heart and life in amazing ways.
Absolutely, yes.
Well, thank you, Carie. Thanks for doing this.
Yes, thanks so much for having me.
And I have a feeling we will be talking again with Zach.
Yes, yes, we would love that for sure. All
Great. Thanks.
right, thank you.